Hello and welcome to Additive Insight, the original additive manufacturing podcast and your source for news, interviews and comment on the latest 3D printing and AM intelligence, brought to you by TCT Magazine. I'm your host Sam Davis and today I'm joined by NexusAM CTO Sebastian Larsen. NexusAM is in the process of developing an AI-powered in-situ monitoring capability for metal additive manufacturing. Larsen, a member of the co-founding team, joins the podcast to discuss the engineering challenges NexusAM is working to solve and the progress the company has made so far. He shares details on the proprietary AI stack that underpins much of the platform's capability, how the company is making additive manufacturing more economical, and how it is leveraging industry feedback to further develop its flagship product. Larsen also reveals when the in-situ monitoring platform will be commercialised and his vision for the company. If you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also head over to tctmagazine.com to subscribe to the TCT membership platform and receive more Additive Insight via our print and digital offerings. Sebastian, welcome to the Additive Insight podcast. We'll talk today about NexusAM's in-situ monitoring capability. But first, can you tell us about your background and the background of your founding team in additive manufacturing and any other relevant vertical markets?
Thanks, Sam. Great to be here. So we founded the company in 2024, and the timing really couldn't have been better. I just finished my PhD at Imperial College, where we were working on in-situ metal monitoring for additive manufacturing. The lab there has one of the most heavily instrumented LPBF machines in the world, and my focus was really on the machine learning side of things, and the rest of the team were focused on developing novel sensing techniques. And what really drove us to start Nexus was this gap we kept seeing between the breakthroughs we were making in the lab and what was actually available in industry. And we realized we had something that we thought could make a big difference. Before my PhD, I spent some time in the oil and gas sector as a mechanical engineer working at Equinor. So we were looking at kind of spare parts, using AM to reduce the spare part count, and the quality assurance technologies really weren't there. I also worked closely with Paul Hooper, who was my thesis supervisor and is now our chief scientist. Paul splits his time between Imperial, where he's an associate professor, and Nexus, and he's been in the metal AM research for over a decade, with particular expertise in process monitoring, quality assurance for critical parts. Paul is actually also one of the pioneers of developing coaxial high-speed imaging systems for LPBF, and so he maintains a strong relationship with the aerospace and defense sectors in the UK. And yeah, he's incredibly busy these days, but his scientific expertise is really invaluable for what we're building. I'm also working with Shaz Gauss, who's our CEO, and he brings a different but complementary perspective. So Shaz previously co-founded Additive Instruments, which was successfully sold in 2003. So he's got real expertise and experience in operating businesses in the space. And he also did his PhD at Imperial, and he was focused on lattice structures for the orthopedics and medtech sector. And he also worked at Stanmore Implants, applying EM. So when Additive Instruments was acquired, the timing was really great for starting to collaborate on Nexus. So between the three of us, we've got deep expertise across AM research, data analytics, machine learning, and bringing novel products to market.
Okay, and as you came together to set up NexusAM, what were the challenges that you guys were and are working to address?
Yes, we identified three major challenges that are really holding back wider adoption of AM. The first is qualification and certification. So the costs are absolutely immense, and they create a huge barrier to entry. So you can see how difficult it becomes to scale AM when you're facing these qualification barriers at every turn. So we need a way to build trust and verify that the machine and processes are doing what you expect. The second challenge is the inspection costs. So things like CT is usually the gold standard, and it lets you detect and quantify pores, inclusions, and things like that within the component. But the cost can be very prohibitive, and it's limited to small parts. So you're only detecting the defect after the process when it's already too late. And you may already have invested in expensive post-processing steps before you discover the flaws. And that's a costly way to find out something's gone wrong. The third challenge is really complex parts. And as I mentioned with CT, large and complex parts can essentially be impossible to inspect properly. So you've got hidden internal surfaces that aren't easy to access. So there aren't many good post-process solutions to allow you to see inside the part. And this is crucial to truly take advantage of what AM can do. We need new methods that can handle the geometric complexity that AM excels at. We can't keep relying on the same old inspection methods designed for traditional manufacturing, and we need new tools for the next gen of AM parts.
Okay, when it comes to the cost of part qualification, can you kind of break down the requirements of that process typically? What does that involve for a manufacturer?
Yeah, absolutely. So part qualification in AM is extraordinarily expensive, and we've heard cases of companies spending potentially millions of dollars with timelines that stretch into the years. And that creates a massive barrier for AM adoption, especially when you're trying to move into large-scale production applications. So I can break down some of the costs that we've come across at least. So around material qualification is the first kind of major expense. So you need extensive testing of both the feedstock and the built material properties. So manufacturers have to prove that the powder or the wire meets the specifications through things like particle characterization and mechanical property testing. And that alone quickly turns into costs in the hundreds of thousands, depending on the material and industry requirement. And then there's the process development itself, which involves countless build trials to establish the optimal parameters. So things like the laser power, scan speed, layer thickness, build orientation. And each of those iterations also can consume expensive materials and machine time. And manufacturers are essentially working blind, adjusting the parameters through trial and error until they finally achieve some sort of acceptance criteria. But the physical testing and validation is where the cost really begins to add up. So this is really the largest cost driver for us. So when you're doing destructive testing, where parts are cut up for things like metallographic analysis, and you do tensile and fatigue testing and porosity measurements with CT for aerospace parts, this becomes very, very expensive when you have to do that kind of analysis on every component. And then on top of that, you have the documentation and certification that goes along with that. So the fundamental problem is that traditional AM kind of operates as this black box at the moment. So the design file goes into the machine. Manufacturers don't have a lot of visibility other than the operator kind of peeking in the window and what's actually happening during those hours and sometimes weeks of building. So they're forced to infer the quality through that expensive post-build inspection and statistical sampling. And even after you've gone through the qualification, you're not done. You still need to maintain that ongoing QA and testing samples from each production run because there's a lack of confidence in the process consistency. And so the entire approach is more reactive rather than predictive. And you can only discover problems after you've already invested the time and money in building those parts.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of the platform that you and the Nexus AM team are developing, what are the key capabilities of that platform? How do you tackle all of those challenges that you've just talked through?
Yeah, so the main capability for the platform and what we see as kind of what's been missing up to this point is providing quantifiable defect detection rather than anomaly detection. So that might sound like a subtle difference, but it's actually a big one. So rather than flagging something that just looks unusual, we're telling you exactly what the defect is and where it is and how big it is. And alongside that kind of core functionality, we're providing the tools that users need to manage and visualize that data and generate the required reports. So these detections can be used to create everything from detailed, rich 3D visualizations to high-level summaries, depending on what you need. And from the user perspective, we've designed the experience to be as straightforward as possible, and we let our technology do most of the heavy lifting behind the scenes. So we're talking about processing and managing potentially terabytes of data per build, and then set up to be automated for real-time alerts and reporting functions. And this quantifiable detection represents really a step change in the capability. So we're now seeing detection results that match or exceed traditional tools in many dimensions. So not only do you get answers in real time during the build, but we can also reliably pick up defects down to 200 microns, and that rivals or exceeds traditional post-build CT scanning, but a fraction of the cost. So you're getting better information faster and more affordably, and that changes the economics of the entire qualification process.
Okay. I understand part of the Nexus offering is a proprietary AI technology stack that is designed to catch defects as or before they happen. What are you able to tell us about that technology stack at this stage? How does it work? And I guess how effective has it proved to be so far?
Yeah, so we're taking a kind of a two-pronged approach to the AI technology. So we have a general AI model that works across different scenarios, and then we have these statistical models that are more tailored to the user and their process. So there's a trade-off between the two, and the general model has the better defect detection capability, while the statistical model is more what the users are used to seeing in production on their manufacturing lines. And so the key design principle for us is we're aiming to be machine and sensor agnostic, and we believe that's really crucial because the AM industry is quite diverse and there's different machines, different sensors, different configurations. So we can't build one solution that works with one specific setup, and that doesn't scale. So now in terms of how it works, so we developed what we call a neural network CT surrogate. So there's a fun number there that the model is trained on several trillion measurements. So it's a really big data set that allows us to see in real time exactly when the part fails during the build, and gives us information about how the part failed. And essentially, we're combining process monitoring with AI to output defect maps in real time. So the information can be incredibly useful. You can stop builds early if something's gone wrong, or feed it directly into a quality assurance reporting framework. And the key to our approach is that the AI models we're developing specifically with they're developed specifically with the AM process in mind. So what machine learning is really good at is encoding rules that humans have developed already and then automating those tasks. And so during my PhD work and previous work in our research group, we were able to take our process knowledge and understanding of defect signatures and encode that into the models. And this approach is vastly superior than, say, applying simple threshold tools or just using off-the-shelf machine learning models. And this gives performance improvements that are in line with the industry-specific requirements for defect detection. And what that means is engineers can focus more on the interesting work of really pushing the process limits rather than spending all their time on the inspection or the analysis of the data. And yeah, in terms of the effectiveness, so the way that we validate our approach is we use something called a probability of detection analysis. And it's a non-destructive evaluation technique that was developed by NASA for the space shuttle program. And what it lets you do is it lets you compare different NDE methods. So it lets you benchmark techniques against things like CT scanning and gives you information about the smallest defect that can be reliably detected. Or another way to think about it is what's the largest defect I could miss? And then you can kind of design your component around the inspection technique. So as I mentioned, we can detect defects reliably to 200 microns, which means you can design parts to that specification with confidence. And this is important because we reached a number that's now competitive with many equivalent industry methods, and that's what really makes it interesting to end users. And presently, there's no other technologies that can detect defects to that size on arbitrary size geometries.
Okay, and in terms of building the AI stack and I guess feeding the AI stack with information, do you use, for example, aerospace industry standards, feed that into the system, and then when you're kind of evaluating the quality of a part, the AI can compare it against the standards it has to adhere to? Does it do that, and does what I just said make sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an interesting one. So what we've taken an approach that we call context-informed machine learning. So through the research that we were doing at Imperial, and over the last few years, we developed this technique that we can incorporate these different context threads into the model that relate to the AM process itself. So rather than just throwing data at a generic AI model, we're taking advantage of how the process actually happens, the physics of the melting, the solidification, and the heat transfer, and creating models that are purpose-built for AM. And one of the key techniques we also use is multimodal machine learning. So if you think about how humans perceive the world, we combine data from different sensors like sight and sound to understand what's happening around us. And we do something similar by combining data from multiple sensors like optical cameras, thermal cameras, photodiodes, and other sensing systems. And by combining all that data together, we're able to create these comprehensive defect maps. And as for the industry standards, we're building our validation framework around the kind of established aerospace and defense requirements. So the probability of detection metric that I mentioned fits nicely in with that. And we're also working closely with a number of the FAA and European EASA working groups on bringing some of this technology to the market and getting it standardized.
Okay, that's interesting. You mentioned earlier the challenge of inspecting and kind of measuring, I guess, large parts or parts of complex geometries. How have you guys kind of approached addressing that challenge? What is the platform able to do that makes the process of inspecting those parts easier?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the more exciting aspects that we're working on and building. So yeah, we often speak about inspecting the uninspectable, and fundamentally AM is limited by inspection. And one of the key challenges we face is that we're stuck in this like paradigm of designing for inspection rather than taking advantage of what the process can actually deliver. And what our technology does is it gives users a completely new dimension to their capability. In many cases, we've had customers come say to us that they've been quoted over £20,000 for a single CT scan, and that price point is basically a non-starter for most applications. And some manufacturers can get away with kind of radiography scanning on larger components, but then the resolution's highly dependent on things like the wall thickness or the thickest section of the component. And what ends up happening is that the design has to fit the inspection requirement. So you end up building in these extremely large safety factors. So sometimes that can be 10 times the actual requirement. And the only real requirement is that the part obviously needs to fit on the build plate. So the process is really the limitation. And it's it's incredibly valuable for users who are making increasingly large parts, and it's one of the areas we're most excited to be working on. And the same principle applies to things like internal surfaces and complex internal geometries. So for critical parts, there's typically a requirement to inspect all the surfaces. And with traditional methods, things like internal channels and complex geometries are essentially uninspectable. So our technology is aiming to change that. We're also seeing users get to grips with things like new materials more quickly, and since they can use that kind of real-time feedback that they get and from rather than their traditional post-build inspection. And so taking those things together with enhanced process insight, it enables users to really understand their parts and how they behave during manufacturing. And that allows you to really push the limits of both the design and the process, so you can achieve better functionality and better economics at the same time, which is pretty rare in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, a lot of what you're working on is the prevention or early identification of defects, right? And there's a lot of capability in there that will help users understand what they've built and whether that matches what they intended to build. Do you see it then as a replacement of kind of final inspection like X-ray and CT destructive testing, or is it a supplementary process to those things that happen at the kind of end of the workflow?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, and I want to be perfectly clear that we're not trying to completely replace the traditional inspection techniques. So things like CT and destructive testing, they do add enormous value to and information to particularly to critical components in quality assurance. So we're aiming for we're aiming for is to make those traditional methods more targeted and more effective. So for example, instead of CT scanning an entire part blindly, you could use our data to say, I need a high resolution CT scan of a specific region because we detected something during the build. So that's a much more efficient use of these expensive inspection tools. The other thing we see people do is kind of batch inspection. So if you have 10 or more parts on a single build plate and you're CT scanning every component, that inspection cost can easily be 50% or more of your total part cost. And that fundamentally kills the AM business case for many applications. But if you can have real-time process data, you can make smarter sampling decisions. So maybe you CT scan a few of those parts at random and use our data to make informed decisions about the others. And you're still validating, but you're doing it strategically rather than exhaustively. And similarly with destructive testing, we see a huge potential for improvement. So looking at kind of industry standards, you often see requirements for tensile coupons and other test specimens on build plates. And there must be thousands upon thousands of coupons that have been tested that don't really tell you anything about the main part that's actually being built. So some of the teams we work with also conduct metallography on batch samples of parts, and that really only tells you about the process on that particular part. It also doesn't tell you about the other parts. So it's not as valuable as that real-time data that we can give you with our systems. And in the short term, we absolutely see a combination of the new data-driven methods and traditional methods as the way forward. We see targeted testing as the future and better use of the tools we already have rather than completely replacing them. So it's about working smarter, not just completely replacing what's already available.
Yeah. At the end of the process, I understand that users get traceable, auditable quality records for every part. Can you tell us what the extent of the information is that's included in those reports, and are they kind of developed in an automated way? Are they done kind of as soon as the process is finished? Those reports are available.
Yeah, so we've worked extensively with the end users to develop our reporting functionalities, and we've really tried to start with the fundamental question of what does the user actually need. So at the end of the day, what the user really needs is a good part, but they also need confidence that it's a good part. And what we've created is a way to use that best available data to generate a comprehensive report on part health. And at a high level, this gives the users an easily digestible summary of all the process data we've collected during the build. So what do we actually mean by part health in terms of process data? So what we're looking at is a combination of statistical measures of the process and essentially looking at process escapes or when the process has deviated from expected parameters alongside the locally detected defects with specific locations and sizes. And the core part of the report is the Nexus AI defect map, which provides the size and locations of predicted defects combined with a simpler interpretable statistical results. And that gives you both the detailed defect information and the overall process health in one place. But we also recognize that different users need different levels of detail, so we enable them to also deep dive into the underlying data if they need to, either for root cause analysis or material development. And the high level summary is really there for a quick go, no go decision, but the detailed data is always available when you need it to understand why something happened. And the reporting functionality is really where a lot of the value gets created for our customers. So we believe that in most use cases, you need reports that can be very quickly digested and understood by an operator or by an AM engineer. And this documentation becomes an essential part for the quality assurance process. Longer term, we see these reports as essential documentation for certifying parts, providing the traceable, auditable records that regulatory bodies require.
Okay. On the Nexus website, the platform is described as sensor and machine agnostic. So when the capability is launched and available, is it available for any user of any Metal AM technology? Is there a phased rollout across technologies and processes? How will that commercial launch of the product work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the technology we've developed can analyze data from a wide variety of machines, including LPBF and other powder bed technologies and things like DED and other AM methods. And we see a lot of overlap between these different technologies in terms of the underlying physics and defect mechanisms. But that being said, each of the technologies do have their unique differences and characteristics. And for the initial product launch, we're really focused on the metal powder bed fusion segment specifically. And we see a particularly strong need there for the tools we're developing, especially for the high-end serial production applications. And that's where the economics of qualification and inspection are really felt the most, and the pain is the strongest. And that's where we can deliver the immediate value. And then within LPBF, we're already able to generalize our technology across the major machine manufacturers, so detecting defects in variety of different platforms, but also different geometries. So if you're running an EOS machine, a Renishaw, an Econity, or another system, then our platform can work with your setup. And the machine agnostic approach is important because manufacturers often have multiple machines from different vendors, and they need quality assurance solutions that work across the entire fleet, not just one specific machine.
Okay. I understand that Nexus has partnered already while the technology is in development with the likes of BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce, GKN. What are you able to tell us about the work that you've done with these companies and I guess the feedback that they have provided so far?
Yeah, so we're really fortunate to be working with some fantastic partners, and part of our work is funded through the Aerospace Technology Institute, which sets the UK aerospace technology strategy. and they see AM as playing a pivotal role in enabling the UK's pursuit of net zero carbon emissions in civil aviation by 2050, and as well as bolstering the global competitiveness of the UK aerospace industry. And so our technology fits into that vision by enabling enhanced designs that leverage the full potential of AM while providing the quality assurance needed for mission critical components. So these two things have to go hand in hand. You can't push the boundaries of the design if you can't verify what you're building is safe and reliable. And the work we're doing will help accelerate the energy, raw material, and environmental efficiencies that AM also promises, reducing waste and emissions in the aerospace manufacturing. And then potentially in the future, beyond aerospace, we're also helping to enable the next generation of clean technologies like nuclear fusion, where organizations like the UK Atomic Energy Authority believe that metal AM will be vital. And the feedback we're getting from the partners is very promising, and they're seeing the potential for real impact, both in terms of performance and sustainability. So we'll be sharing more details around that specific project outcome soon, but I can say we're excited about the direction that it's heading.
Good stuff. Is there a timeline in place yet for a wider rollout of the technology? Do you know how far away you are from kind of opening up access to a wider pool of companies?
So we've been in early stage testing with our customers over the past year or so, and that's gone incredibly well and exceeded expectations. And we're now signing up beta partners for later this year, with a full launch currently planned for 2027. And so it's an exciting time for us. And if any listeners have made it this far or interested in what we're doing, we'd love to hear from you. And if you'd like to reach out for a demo or just to learn more about what we're building, we're always keen to talk with potential partners and that are also looking to push the boundaries of what's possible with AM.
Hopefully they have made it this far. There's only one question left. Thank you for your time today, Sebastian. Beyond 2027, beyond the launch of the product, what would you say is the vision for the company? What does Nexus AM ideally want to achieve with its technology and with its capability?
Yeah, so we really believe that AI is going to revolutionize the design, simulation, and defect detection for AM. So we're living in one of probably the most exciting times in this industry, I think. And we're at really the bleeding edge of manufacturing technology as well as a whole. And it's a privilege for us to be contributing to that advancement. And AM's been through many hype cycles as well over the years. So we're taking a pragmatic approach to this and combining the best of traditional methods with the AI capabilities rather than trying to replace everything overnight. And that's why we see our technology working alongside existing inspection methods, making them targeted and effective. And looking forward, we see AI becoming increasingly embedded in manufacturing. There's no way of getting around that. The likes of Jensen Huang at NVIDIA mentioned last week at CES that physical AI and robotics are approaching their ChatGPT moment. We'll see if he's right, but we are seeing some trends in manufacturing, even though it's traditionally an industry that's been hesitant to adopt the latest technologies. And the role we want to play in giving end users the tools to generate those quantifiable insights in real time without needing a PhD and months of time to analyze the data. And that's what we want to enable is data-driven qualification. And throughout the conversation, we've chatted about how our technology changes the economics of AM, and I think we're enabling better functionality and better economics at the same time. And when you take that to the logical conclusion, you arrive at a future where parts can be qualified in weeks instead of months or weeks instead of years. And that part qualification time compression doesn't just improve efficiency, it fundamentally unlocks applications that aren't economically viable today. It's the difference between AM being a niche technology and being a mainstream manufacturing method. And at Nexus AM, we're incredibly excited to be part of making that a future reality.